my personal passion is the earth and is interacting with the earth and with wild nature.
Knowing who you have around you, valuing those strong and useful and vibrant connections.
So our focus has been primarily on how do we keep people in rural areas? How do we make that more possible?
Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast. Today we have a roundtable on social permaculture and we have three very special guests here today. Do you want to give a quick 30-second introduction, please? Alfred, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Alfred Decker and I live near Barcelona, Spain. And increasingly my work in permaculture is how it can be useful to refugees and migrants. So I collaborate with a network called Permaculture for Refugees.
Eleanor?
Yes, hello. My name is Eleanor Todini and I'm based in South France, 5 hours away from Alfred. I am a permaculture designer and I work basically all around the world. So happy to be here.
Great stuff. Christopher?
Good afternoon it looks like all of you are in afternoon now. It's still morning for us. My name is Christopher Nesbitt. My wife and I live in southern Belize, and we manage something called the Maya Mountain Research Farm, which is a 35-year-old permaculture project. This focused primarily on agroforestry with an emphasis on carbon drawdown and creating resilient food models.
And I'm Cormac Harkin, founder of Vine Permaculture and your host today. Before we get into the social permaculture, Christopher, you've had a torrid few months. Do you want to just give us an update on the fires and
I'm having post-traumatic stress disorder, not literally at this moment, but yeah, we in the area where we live, people do slash and burn agriculture, and most years, when I managed Toledo Cacao Growers, which was a cooperative of farmers in Punta Gorda town, every year 1 or 2 fires would damage a farm. 1 or 2 cacao farms would get damaged. Some years none. This last year, 400 farms in Toledo district were damaged by escaped agricultural fires. So our farm was hit by fire, but for the previous month, we were basically fighting fires across the river, helping our neighbors. We're helping some of the villages nearby where we live. San Miguel, Silver Creek. I can't remember the other name of the village. It's right next to Silver Creek. They have a border. Anyway, so we were basically doing that. And then, of course, we got hit with the fire. It finally reached us. One of the fires hit us. And we were very fortunate in that we had, about 50, 60 people show up, including 2 squads from the Belize Defense Force. And it was it was a big tragedy for us. We lost about 5 acres of cultivated area, most of it relatively young, so less than 11 years old. So the core of the farm was unaffected, but it could have been a lot worse. And we had people from the Belize Defense Force. We had people from Toledo Institute for Development and Environment come. We had people from our village, people from the neighboring villages. People coming far away as Placencia to come down and help us. So we were spared. It could have been a lot worse. And and now we've got rain, and so the farm looks green again, which is nice. I'm kind of looking out at this. That doesn't do anything. Green screen. But we've had a relatively mild rainy season. I'd like more rain, but things are recovering. And it was an example of how people can pull together in the face of adversity. We were very, very fortunate that we had a lot of people willing to come out and help us.
That's good. It's great to have you back on. And glad you are coming out the other side of it. So on the social permaculture, Alfred, do you want to just go first there? So what does social permaculture mean to you? And do you want to tell us a bit about your experience with it?
Sure. So I've been very influenced in permaculture through the work of Rosemary Morrow, who wonderful educator from Australia, who after traveling around the world for 40 years came to the conclusion that at least in the beginning of permaculture, there was a certain colonial aspect to it of, thinking of Australia, of your person or your family with their 5 acres behind the house, and not so much connection between people and permaculturalists. And what she came to believe is that if permaculture doesn't serve the needs of a big part of humanity, it's limited in its scope. I mean, there's nothing bad about doing permaculture on the 5 acres out back. It's just that it comes from a bit of a colonial heritage, and it doesn't speak to or serve the needs or resonate with the vast majority of the people on the planet. So she's been really influential in looking at how can permaculture be useful, and how can it spread in places like mega cities of more than 30 million people, or um, countries post-conflict such as Vietnam or Angola or Afghanistan. And I've been influenced by that, because I remember when I was studying sustainable architecture, I was looking at how only around 4% of our land mass is urbanized. Yet for the first time, more than half of our species, more than half of the human population, live in urban areas, which consume about 80% of the resources on the planet and generate about 80% of the pollution. So for me, it just became interesting to think about, if we don't find ways that permaculture is applied to the cities, then that resource extraction from the cities will damage the countryside that we love. So this is a bit where I'm coming from. Again, my personal passion is the earth, and is interacting with the earth and with wild nature. I fortunately have spent lots of time in beautiful wild places in North America, for example. But right now, at this moment in my life, I'm most passionate about working with people such as refugees and migrants in permaculture. I think it's for me, it's a really useful way to try and spread permaculture more widely, and help us to scale permaculture up to the level we really need to get it to respond to the climate emergency, for example.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Social permaculture. I'm not a pro of it, but the idea that I get from it is, so social is, it's you are related to someone, right, or to a network. So it has to do with your relationship to someone, but also how this person mirrors you back. And I would say I can see two things. I can see that using permaculture, using the principle of observation to really observe how you interact with the person that you have in front, and really, like, take time to verticalize, let's say, your vision, and see yourself in the game, but you are up there, can really be interesting to improve and identify some patterns that you have, or some links, invisible links, that otherwise you couldn't see. So I would say using that principle in social and in relationships, this is to me one part of how I can apply permaculture to my social life. And also, second thing is really just knowing who you have around you, valuing those strong and useful and vibrant connections, and also connecting them. When you see a mutual point, I really like to connect people, so so that they can create more value for themselves and for, for this planet, basically. So I think that's my definition of social permaculture. Try, like, see where the value is and how can you give everything that you have to make it possible. And then, until you don't have all the power in your hands, you just do what you can. But seeing that, yes. So that's to me what it is.
Thank you, Christopher.
Well, first of all, speaking to what Alfred said, that um, I think I consider what we do as sort of retro permaculture, like move off into the middle of nowhere, buy a piece of land that's in a sad or pathetic state and fix it up, and that the real frontier for permaculture is the urban environment for exactly all the reasons Alfred said. The part of our work is trying to figure out ways to stop the stop the flow, stem the flow rather, of rural to urban migration caused by inability to earn sufficient income in rural areas, so that there's no need to go to the city or the town or in Belize. I arrived in Belize in the mid 1980s, and at that time, forestry, fisheries, and agriculture were the economic engines of Belize. They were the sort of the drivers of prosperity. They earned income, employed most of the people that were working in those areas. And since then, we've moved on to tourism. Had a big boom, and now tourism was the number one income earner for Belize. Which is, I'm not going to say tourism is a bad thing, but it is a very fragile economy. You get a downturn in the economy in other countries that had robust economies with disposable income, and all of a sudden the housing bubble bursts, or there's a pandemic, and all of a sudden there's empty hotels and unemployed people, and so our focus has been primarily on how do we keep people in rural areas, how do we make that more possible. But I do agree with what Alfred said, that the real frontier of permaculture right now is in the urban environment, because that's where most of our species is ending up. And how do we make those cities more sustainable and better? Marisha Auerbach, who's I have had the pleasure of working with, teaching with her several times. She did a lot of work. I don't know exactly where she is right now, but she was in Portland, and she does absolutely great work in the urban environment. So I think social permaculture itself is an offshoot coming out of the ethics, and it's one of the things that I stress when we teach, is that the ethics are the foundation of permaculture. If the ethics are not there, it might be fantastic agriculture. It might be really, really productive and creating lots of multifunctional elements and elements that provide multiple functions, and might be really great, very productive. But if it's not grounded in the ethics, it's not really permaculture. It's just basically sophisticated farming or sophisticated gardening. And so for me, social permaculture is about how do we work with our neighbors and how do we work with one another to create systems that are less fragile, less prone to breakage or failure, and how do we become mutually supportive. And so that's kind of my definition of social permaculture.
Thank you. Well, for me, I get a bit of, when I heard the term previously, I would have given it like a metaphorical eye roll. So, and I didn't really understand it. But the more I learned about it then, so I attended Alfred's course for a 3-day course, wasn't it? And then I realized then a lot of the things I was doing was social permaculture. I just didn't realize it. So whether that be working with other people on things. So my experience over, I work in a permaculture collab, which has a social permaculture, or what, sociocracy light sort of type governance, where it's just people who do the work make the decisions. And since working in that environment and doing the course, I sort of wish I had that knowledge going into the start when we started up Vine Permaculture. It would have definitely made things easier of writing things down and how we govern ourselves and how we communicate, and it would have avoided a lot of friction. But I do understand that there is a people will say certain people say, "Oh, it just slows things down." I probably would have said that myself, but since learning about it, I'm more open to it, and I think I definitely see its value. That's my experience of it. The floor is open if anyone wants to take it.
Yeah. Well, I could jump in. I want to clarify something that I don't think I elaborated so well. But for me, with social permaculture, I don't think it means no one needs to change their passion or really what they're doing, but rather it's something that we can incorporate into our practice in permaculture, regardless of what we're doing, whether we're consulting, whether we have amazing rural projects like Christopher has in Belize, whether we're doing education, regardless. And it's really incorporating so much learning that has happened over the last decades, and it can strengthen our practice. And I want to say this because sometimes when I talk about social permaculture, one of the participants will raise a hand and say, "Yeah, but I love gardening. I don't want to have to give that up." And the point is, great, you don't need to give it up. Stay with what you're passionate about. But so often over the 3 decades almost now that I've been in permaculture, what I've seen is that permaculture projects that when they have failed or when they do not advance or evolve very well, it's not because the greywater system didn't work so well. It's not because the soil wasn't fertile enough, or the regenerative practices weren't well done. It's because we're not very good at living and working and collaborating together right now. And I'll speak of, I'll speak mostly of the Western world because that's where I'm from. I'm from the United States, so the most individualist culture that has probably ever developed in the history of our species. And I was taught growing up, look out for a number one, compete, beat out the others, and so on. And this way of thinking, if you grew up in that environment, it's hard to change that and learn how to cooperate. It's hard to think in terms of abundance and being there to pull up the other, instead giving them a helping hand up instead of a helping hand down when we grow up in these environments. So because I want permaculture to scale up around the world, again, I think right now we have an incredible base of knowledge around regenerative agriculture. For example, we have an incredible knowledge of how to regenerate damaged soils, about how to reforest degraded landscapes, and so on, about how to draw down carbon. Now I think our challenge is, how do we create social structures that allow those kinds of projects to flourish? So that's my specific kind of passion or challenge now, but in part because I've seen so many projects or communities fail over the years, and not because of lack of knowledge of permaculture, but because we just are not learning well how to deal with conflicts. We don't know well how to create structures that allow for efficiency, but also empowerment at the same time. And that's why I think, Cormac mentioned sociocracy, this governance structure that I think is hugely useful and has huge potential for us to use in how we organize ourselves in projects.
And we should also look at the ancestral ways, right, of governing. Maybe there are some that can adapt to each project. Each project, maybe you have a couple that is leading a project in Namibia, or you have 5 people that are, close to Barcelona. And it's really like not hurry up, like don't be in a hurry of doing. First observe and understand who you are co-creating with, and understand the vision for everyone, and communicate and be clear And then once you know who is really like in with you, then at this point, co-create, inspiring yourself from other projects, from other social structures. But it's really like people, they, there is a huge from I've been talking to a lot of people and visiting some quite numerous projects, and I've seen that people want to do now, but instead of just because we are told to to hurry, like in this modern world, we need to hurry, right? But just take a step back and take 1 year, 1 year and a half to create the team, understand where, understand what, create your why, and then it will flow very naturally because you will know the people you're working with, you will know the people that you're co-creating with even before starting the project, right?
Yep.
So
Hey,
one of the things is that thank you. Sorry. One of the things is I think as the older we get, the more knowledge and skill sets we have, and how useful it would have been to have these skill sets 20 years ago, or knowledge base that we had, or because it would have been informed by the experience that we were yet to develop. So that is one of the things. I'm 58 right now, and I am at the apex of my game. I'm really good at what I do. I really love what I do, and so one of the things that my wife and I have found a niche. We work with farmers in different capacities. Last year we did training of women in uh, vanilla production in the north of Belize. Next month we'll be doing training of women in a former refugee community and also at the University of Belize in vanilla production, courtesy of the Republic of Taiwan. And so as we get older, we've got these skill sets that are kind of sitting around. They're useful to our daily life, but if we look closely, frequently find that they can be useful outside of our daily life. So we know how to work with farmers. We know a fair bit about land use. I do solar work as because farming doesn't really pay much, but we do solar work on the side. So we've installed a couple of village level water pumping systems. We've put DC lighting systems, or even bigger systems in schools and clinics and community centers. And I think one of the things is once you develop these skill sets that are useful, finding a place that you can plug in and make use of the skill set that you develop becomes relatively uncomplicated. So it's fairly easy. It's like, oh, this is what's needed. I've got the skill set. We've developed the skill set. We can share it the same way that, like when I started farming, I knew nothing about farming. The only reason I got into farming is I wanted to live in Belize, and the easiest way in the 1980s was to buy a piece of land and either go into ecotourism, which I decided not to do, or go into farming. And it was more of an immigration dodge than anything else. Um, so I guess what my point is that social permaculture is really important because without it, it's just gardening, and also that the more skill sets that we can acquire and use in that capacity, the better. Um, and how grateful I am that I'm at this point in my life where I'm good at some of these things, and uh, yeah, and there's a lot of need. That's the other thing. There's a pressing need everywhere on the planet for the skill sets that people like all of us have developed.
Alfred, were you going to say something there before?
yeah, well, just what I was actually going to ask you, Cormac, from the 3-day permaculture course that we did together in Ireland. What were some takeaways for you, or how could you imagine? So this social permaculture course was at an art center in Derry, Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the idea was, how can permaculture be used in the social organization of this art center that had new management? It was under new management. There was a dynamic new director. and staff who were up for applying permaculture on a social level. And I could talk more about that, but I'm wondering if anything stood out for you, Cormac, or anything was surprising in particular, or that you could take back to use with what you do.
I think there's a couple of things with the fact that I realized I was doing it already and it wasn't this mystical thing that some people talk about it more than others. So I was very skeptical of it. But it turned out I was doing a lot of it anyway, like the volunteering at a repair cafe. That's social permaculture, networking with other people, working together towards a common goal. Um, the Vine is made up of three people who are working towards a common goal. We have a like an agreement about how we do that. And that's all social permaculture, not necessarily strictly in anything defined. And then the other thing was about the urban permaculture that you mentioned previously. Up to that point, I was still sort of the notion, I have to get land and move out to the country, and that's how I'm going to
Hmm.
do permaculture. But then I realized I'm not a farmer. I have limited time, so it's like, right, with the time that I have, how do I design myself and the community better, and how do I practice where I'm at, rather than this notion that I have to be a farmer, I have to produce food, which is the sort of vision that people have of you when you say you do permaculture or you're a gardener, and it's like, well, no, I have to try and get away with that. So that was the big thing, that I have something to share. That if I'm practicing in an urban environment, well, that's just as important as someone who's teaching farming. So it is relevant. So it just gave me that reassurance that I was on a good path, and then it just sort of changed my opinion on what my goals were. Because I have kids who don't really want to move out to the country. School is a 2 minute walk away. If I don't have a car, it's no problem. We walk. We have elderly parents at the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill. So if we moved away, we're adding 20, 30 minute travel time to them. So again, that's to me was social permaculture, that we're choosing to be beside family so we can take care of them and be more of a support to them. So that was the big takeaways. It was reassurance. Uh,
I have two things to add as well. I would like to bounce on, Christopher, what you said before about creating the network that is sustainable to you and to your community. I really agree with this because, as you say, Cormac, not everybody has a farm, but when someone wants to do permaculture, it can be in a tiny garden. And then, of course, you don't have the surface to be resilient and produce your own food 100%. But it's okay, because I see the value is in the connections that you create outside that actually fit your life style. Like, for instance, I will give you an example. I have a garden where I started planting annuals, but then I saw that I couldn't take care of that because I am not
Hmm.
here most of the time. So I started planting perennials. And then talking to my neighbors, talking to the farmers around here, they told me, hey, you have a super cool vine that grows, it's a perennial. It goes dormant in winter, but you can harvest it from from June to October, and it's called chayote, right? And so I started planting chayote and trying it a little bit everywhere. And sometimes it climbs on trees, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it fails, it depends. But it's like, build your little plant community in your little area, and then go and find some valuable connections. Like, I go buy my food to an organic farmer. I know they have very good practices and things like that, right? And also, there is another thing that is really valuable to me is how you treat your collaborators. Where do you place value? Do you place the value in the money exchange? Do you place the value in the care and in the relationship? And this is super important, because to keep valuable connections, you need to put the human at first and to empower, your collaborators. Say, hey, you can do that, and I trust you, and I asked you because I know you can, and you have the skills, right? And I want to pay you as soon as you deliver. I don't want to make you wait 2 months, right? And it's the same thing with the project with the landowners. Same thing. I am really in this dynamic of trust, right? So to me, this is how permaculture can be applied to the social level as well.
Super.
Yeah, so I've gone down a summer path with perennials as well. So I've stopped doing annuals because I just don't have the time, and it's like it's in a so trying to redesign the property as well now that I'm sort of comfortable in my own skin and what I can actually do instead of trying too hard, and then you miss a couple of weeks and you go out and everything's a mess. I just realized that I don't have the time, because just a reality kicked in a wee bit. But that course did help me realize that, and how do I strengthen them bonds, and what can I offer my community as well? What can I provide? And then with definitely as well, I didn't mention there the problems we had. Fine, just with personalities and stuff, that would have been avoided if we had a set down a memorandum of understanding, or just make that more formal without being too taxing.
Yeah.
We're talking about perennials versus. Oh, sorry, Alfred. I interrupted you last time. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, but don't forget, I want to hear what you said. But anyway, just briefly, I teach courses usually in the summertime when there's not a pandemic with this teacher from California called Starhawk. And in every course, we always talk about how, plants don't have egos. Buildings, if they're well designed and oriented towards the sun, they don't generate conflicts with other buildings. But humans, even when they're given the right conditions, when everything should be, ideal, there's something in our nature or at this stage of our evolution as a species that we just seem to generate conflicts all the time. And I think that there are so many changes happening so rapidly in our human world now that I think we can really apply permaculture observation and design to the social, just like we do to the ecological. And I call this the social microclimate. And one thing I'm observing as a permaculture educator is that increasingly the issue of neurodivergence is becoming more prominent, and that people are, I think, recognizing it's okay, and it's more understood and recognized that people have different ways of learning and communicating. And there's this spectrum of neurodivergence. And so as educators, if we're not observing that, and if we're not accepting feedback and applying self-regulation, then we're going to be leaving out and not serving the learning needs of an increasing percentage of the population. So, really about social permaculture, I just think that there's many ways that we can apply our observation skills, and we can apply principles to the social context or the social microclimate, just like the ecological. Christopher, please, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say one thing. I was going to talk about the what I call the perennial debate between annuals and perennials, and there's some people who feel if you're not growing lots of annuals, you're not a real farmer. But what you touched on is actually much more interesting, and that's actually been our design strategy. We've got acres and acres and acres of multi-strata agroforestry system that produces multiple yields. But what you touched on is really much more interesting, because the problem, Selene and I joke about this, the problem with social permaculture is the social part. That people are notoriously difficult to deal with shifting agendas, and like one day everybody's in consensus about this, and then the next day that people are not in consensus about this, and then there's factions on certain issues, and like we are really complicated species and really difficult to work with, and plants are fairly easy to work with. They have specific needs. You give them those needs. They have expected, anticipatable outcomes and yields, and people are really not. I also say that Starhawk taught here. I don't know, back in I think 2015, 16, 17. Anyway, a while ago. And it was lovely having her here, and we got to spend time with her after the IPC in India, traveling to Elora. So I really enjoyed working with her. Um, yeah, the what you touched on really, we talk about this. The hardest thing to deal with in permaculture is people, because people, our agendas change, our alliances kind of mutate, and our needs evolve in a way that plants don't. And so, um, yeah. One thing I'll say that in terms of social permaculture, one of our practices is because we have a huge surplus of food. For the last 20 years, we've donated food to an elderly feeding program in Punta Gorda town. It's one of the things that we do, and we do it because we can, because we are extremely wealthy people in every way except for money. Our money is, the perpetual problem, but we always have surplus of food or surplus of something, so or skill set and time. Not always at the same time that we have surplus time and surplus food. I just figured I'd mention that before I forget, because that constitutes a big aspect of social permaculture that we practice. And it's, again, this point in our lives, the older people in the room, looking at you, Alfred, because we've got skill sets and knowledge base, and build up a foundation that we can do stuff with. Anyway, yeah, but what you said about the most difficult part of permaculture tends to be the human aspect, and I really appreciate somebody said that out loud, because I would not have said that out loud myself without somebody else saying first.
Do you know what we say in French? We say the PFH, le putain de facteur humain, the full human factor. And yeah.
So I have a question for Eleanor. What do you find to be the most challenging human part of the work you do as a consultant?
Oh, as a consultant, I can explain. As a human, I will try to explain. Challenging. No, so far I haven't had challenging projects with consultants, because the goals have, I think, because the goals have already, have always been clear. The communication, we built trust before. And so I have never really had, I can't think. No. I've never really had conflict with my collaborators, but in everyday life, of course, I have conflicts. And to bounce on what you said, Alfred, about neurodivergence, this is something that is more and more accepted, but not by everyone. And this goes back to the observation, right? Like, we are ego-centered. So just pop up out of your shell, and just, the eagle view, get the eagle view, and look at who you have around. And there's also a big factor of patterns, the patterns that we have from our family. Well, this is not a psychological podcast, but there's a lot of patterns that we have acquired. And in order to deconstruct that, it's a lifetime work. But the more you get in depth, the more you free yourself. And so what I really think is important is the education that we give since the beginning to the kids. How do you educate them? How do you talk to them? How do you relate to them? What's the education model? Do you empower the kids, or do you just, like a mom who is super afraid and gives her fears to the kids? So it is really education for me is the key, because when you're already old, age old, let's say, it is super difficult to look back and accept to do this work, right? You have the ego and you build yourself as a system, a belief system that would just fall apart if you just, one break. So education is the key. I think. What do you guys answer or think about it?
Yeah, I agree. I think consensus building exercises, if in any group of people are worthy, if you're going to be working with people for a while and get people to understand what consensus is, and so there's certain things everybody can unite against, like kicking puppies is a bad thing. Okay, we're all in consensus of that. Other things can be more nuanced, and you people have different beliefs about something, and so anytime you're going to have a group of people that'll be working together for a while, a solid foundation, a memorandum of understanding is a good way to reduce the possibility of conflict in the future, because behaviors and anticipated or expected inputs and yields are all delineated and codified. And then if there is a conflict, you can go back to the MOU and look at that and say, okay, well, it says right here, da, 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 da. And, in terms of if it's paid work, compensation is based on X, Y, and Z. And so one of the ways that you can eliminate some of the conflict that we as a species face is, before you embark on any endeavor, to delineate very clearly what the anticipated outcomes are, and the yields and the behavior that's expected from every participant. And it's a really hard thing to do in the very beginning, because it's like, oh, really? We got to go through all of that? But it's really useful later on. I'm involved in several projects here and believe that there are really delineated, codified rules about how the organization is run. So there's no question of what your role is, or what your responsibilities are for the position that you're holding. And I think that's really important. And getting more people, I think doing that, having a consensus building exercise, helps people to sort of start to empathize with other people's point of view, which is also a key in my experience to mutually beneficial relationships with different people working towards a common goal.
You may have touched on this already, but so we're well aware of the human factor challenges. So what key skills or mindsets would you need to develop to practice social permaculture effectively?
Well, I would say different practices, first of all, around communication, such as nonviolent communication. And I want to say
Mm-hmm.
about the practice of NVC, nonviolent communication, that many people, including myself at times, can find the actual formula a bit too overstructured, or maybe not so natural. In nonviolent communication, you have a formula for how you communicate about an issue or conflict with someone else. But I think that too many people get hung up on that and think, oh, I don't want to do the formula, so then I can't do NVC. But actually, a lot of the principles of NVC are just so useful, such as people taking responsibility for their emotions and their reactions. Also, people making requests instead of demands of others. There's very, very useful material in nonviolent communication. Also, learning to see conflict as an opportunity to strengthen organizations or strengthen relationships between people, which I find terribly difficult. For me, this is a lifelong learning process of trying to see conflict as something instead of something to avoid, which is kind of how I was raised as a person, to actually embrace it as, look, we're people, we're going to have conflicts. So the point is, how can we use that inevitable process of entering into conflict as something that can build us as individuals, as well as our organizations, as well as friendships and working relationships. But then also useful tools are, I think, governance and decision making, such as sociocracy, or different uses of consensus compared to consent, which is we probably would need a whole different show to talk about that. But, in the same way that if we start out with permaculture gardening, or if we start out learning agroforestry, we're going to go from the pattern to the details, really learning some broad concepts. And then there's a whole world of details that we can learn and go more deeply into in order to create resilient, efficient systems. And it's really the same for the social as well as the ecological. So if we're going to create a project, and I think what Christopher said about MOUs, memorandums of understanding, it's so important. It's so, and whether it's called an MOU or whether it's called something else, but to have clarity about who is responsible for what and what happens if something doesn't happen. These things are just so hugely important. And even now in today's world where we should know better, they're often not designed into new projects. So, in the same way that I think that permaculture has accumulated this vast and sacred body of knowledge regarding ecological wisdom and practices and so on, we're now also doing the same on a social level, and it's exciting. And again, so Cormac, about your question specifically, so about, I would say, skills around communication, about governance, about decision making, about conflict transformation, and about structuring agreements. These are the things I think I would say, are the most useful skills in social permaculture. But I want to add one more. Also, this field of knowledge and understanding and philosophy called decolonization. So the understanding that after 500 years since the transatlantic slave trade started, there are still vivid impacts from the past and currently in all of our societies, and everyone has been infected in different ways. And if we can, to the degree that we can engage with this, will be the degree to which we can create structures and organizations and relationships with different people in different places, in different circumstances in life. And I think it's a very enriching and challenging and painful and necessary process, decolonization.
And Alfred, there is one, now that you asked me that question about conflict and in my work. So I cannot see any conflicts with a consultant, but I had a conflict with a client. And it was because the client that mixed up also friendship. So he basically, there was a framework, right? And he basically changed the framework. So instead of implementing there was a permaculture design, and then there was the implementation. So I was there with another person to do the implementation. So he changed that to, I want to recover 25 olive trees in that forest. So let's just cut the forest. I was like, what? this is how conflicts arise. And then, two girls with, a saw, like, no way, it's super dangerous. It's, and we are not there for this. So this is how, like, changing the frame, but on the spot, like, we were already there. We took a boat, right? We crossed the Mediterranean to go there. It was in Corsica. And when you're there and you are hosted by the client in his house, so it's complicated. And the framework really needs to be super clear and not change, because this way it just creates conflicts and bye-bye, right? So that was one.
One of the things that you mentioned, the MOU again, and I can't stress how important having that is, because when the conflicts inevitably arise, you just can go back to the MOU if it's well written and it codifies everything, and it removes all of the ego clashing. It's like, no, it's delineated right here. So that's like, I can't stress how valuable that's been in some of the work that we do, is to have something to refer back to that is, and then build consensus on the interpretation of it, where everybody's like, okay, yeah, that's what that means, and this is gonna, so yeah.
Yeah.
Alfred, are you aware of any resources for MOUs that are out there? Any free resources that we could share? We can put them in the link, sure, if you.
Well, yeah, I can suggest one. I'm working on a new version of a permaculture teacher training manual that has two examples of MOUs. But I'd love to hear more about Christopher or Eleonore. What kind of documents are you using, or if there's any?
Well, okay, I'll just speak. I think it was called Barnaby's Code, and was a colonial thing. That was, I don't remember if it was strictly in Belize or it's a pirate thing, and it's basically, well, because Belize was originally a pirate state, and founded by buccaneers, and yes, and but what it does is it delineates everything, and then you can refer to it, and then it removes all the doubt. I won't go into specifics on all of this right now, because it'll be, a very long anecdote, and a series of anecdotes. But I found it really valuable, because once you refer to that, it removes all the ambiguity, and then you get consensus on what does this mean, and once people have familiarized themselves with it, that ambiguity is gone too, because they understand this is what that means, and this is how this functions. And really, really valuable in dealing with clashing egos. So yes, that's, yeah.
There's two things, two situations, I would say. The first is really once the object of the project is known, it's really like framing a pre-project in with the people are mentioned, who does what is the deadline, what are the deliverables, or all these things that where is the limits of work as well. Like, I'm doing this, but I am not doing that. So this is really a frame, super important. And then before this, when you actually need to define the object, what I like to do, and this is more for a group of people that is starting their permaculture project, is really bringing them through the vision, the planification of their idea that I have inside, and make them confront each other. Like, everyone does the exercise and everyone speaks, so everyone knows who everyone is thinking and feeling, right? And then we build a vision, a common goal, with all these the persons leading the project. And then once there is this vision, then we can put it into we can materialize through by doing, right? Like, okay, the practical thing is we do this and this and this, and there's planning, and then there's the implementation. I am really thinking about like the project parts, not really like living in community, but even building a community, they could use this technique, right? So it's really like assessing before the vision, mission, and planning, like how you will do this in time, and then do it, right? Uh, so
So I'll just interject something. One of the things is cultural context for some of these things that we're doing, and behavior in one community or set interaction that you might do in one community might have to be done differently in another community. In Belize, my wife and I, we work in different Kekchi and Mopan Maya communities. We work in Creole and East Indian communities. We work in Mestizo communities. We work in refugee communities at various times. And so the way you deal with them, it can be very different. Like in a refugee community, we talk with the community leader, who may not be the alcalde or the mayor or the village council chairperson. In Maya communities, we always go work directly with the alcalde. So we're gonna, let's say we're doing a tree planting project, or we're doing a water pumping project, and one of the first things we do is we go speak directly with the alcalde, because that is the person. Alcaldes in Maya communities tend to be male, but there have been a few female
oh,
alcaldes. In fact, we worked with the first female alcalde in Belize on one of our water pumping systems, and she was a really good alcalde. We happened to show up in time for. We had a meeting with her, and she agreed to meet with us, but she had alcalde court. And she's busy handing out $25 Belize fines for people who didn't show up to do the village cleanup. And she was like, but because of that community, that was the way you have to work in that community. You have to get consensus to work in the community, and the gatekeeper for that tends to be either the alcalde or the village council. I prefer working with the alcalde because that's more of a traditional form of government than the village council, which is a second form of government installed by the government and the central government in Belmopan, as a way for the government to have more interaction with the individual communities. But many of these communities were autonomous even 20 years ago, that had relative amounts of autonomy from the rest of Belize, both social and economic autonomy, because they were in remote areas. And so I think it's very important to understand the context of the communities that you're working in. Albert Bates talks about that. Albert is, I taught when Starhawk was here, Albert invited Starhawk to teach here. And Albert Bates is one of the smartest people I've ever had a cup of coffee with. I have genuine love and affection for him. He was one of the first people to understand what I was talking about here. And he talks about this. He said, yeah, okay, when I teach in Mexico, my behavior and the way people interact with each other is very different than if I'm teaching in the Middle East. In Mexico, you can join a big circle and everybody holds hands, but in some in the Middle East, you don't necessarily do that. Men and women don't necessarily hold hands. And understanding the cultural context in the communities that you're working with is super important, and should be the foundation or lens through which you look at the work that you're doing, or how you're going to implement the work that you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hey, what role do you think social permaculture can play in responding to global issues, whether it be climate change, migration, political unrest? Anybody want to jump into that one?
Gosh, you and your big questions. Can we talk about sports or the weather or soap operas or
Right.
something?
uh,
Well, I mean,
well, we like solutions here. uh,
I guess I would, I could just jump in and say that from having grown up in the United States of America, where there's many great people and many great developments that have come out of that country. But it's also a country that has been at war ever since its founding. And right now I live in the Mediterranean, and just across the Mediterranean there is a conflict that is raging. And also thinking about something that Eleanor talked about education. I mean, I think that social permaculture can play a huge role in educating us, even as adults, in how we can reduce conflict, how we can create organizations or even a society that's more just. And there's so much that we need to do socially with these basic skills of how do we agree on things together? How do we communicate with each other? What do we do when there's a conflict? What do we do when people have responsibilities that are spelled out in a memo of understanding and they don't fulfill those responsibilities? These are things that we're generally, as in the Western world, we're just not good at doing. And I think, there are reasons for that, because we live in a society where there are strong states that will intervene with lawyers, with police, or so on, or social workers, if people don't behave well. But our task is to create a society with minimal inputs, just like we want to create agricultural systems that require a minimal amount of work and inputs. It's the same thing for society. And so with social permaculture, I guess what I want to say about it is, in the 1990s, when I first did a PDC, in a place in California. And I can remember clearly to this day, as we're going around the room introducing ourselves around the circle, there was someone who introduced herself as Starhawk. And so it turns out Starhawk and I took our first PDC as students together at the same time, because
That's
we had both
wonderful.
come to the same conclusion
Wow.
that while we were really inspired by the anti-globalization movement, this international anti-capitalist movement that really had taken form and shape and was really active in the 1990s, but we wanted to learn how to combine ecological justice and social justice. And both Starhawk and I at that time, we really thought and we really perceived that the ethics of permaculture, earth care, people share, fair share, really coincided with the ethics of this anti-globalization movement, that we were critiquing global capitalism, we were critiquing the unfair distribution of resources, and the recognition that without social justice, we're never going to be able to have ecological justice, and vice versa. So, having said all this, it's just to say that now I think we're in a really lifelong learning process of undoing some of the garbage that we learned about individualism and competition. And to the degree that we can improve our skills in cooperation, in communication, in conflict transformation, it will just help everything that we're doing in permaculture and help us to regenerate this planet.
I agree with you, Alfred, with this last thing that you said. And Cormac, if like the question that you asked, Cormac, is how social permaculture can help right now in the world with all these big things that we're witnessing. It is really creating those spotlights, right? Those little bubbles of consciousness awakening, right? Awakening the consciousness, people care, earth care, fair share, all those bubbles. And someone at some point comes, interconnects. And the humanity, I don't feel the humanity right now is ready for the big shift. Like, no, there's no way. There's so much garbage still around, but we are creating more and more bubbles everywhere. So at some point, the critical mass will be reached so that those bubbles become the new system, right? or the new paradigm. I don't want to say system, I want to say paradigm, right? And social permaculture is really doing this. And maybe it's not even known as social permaculture, but I see that humanity is working on their ego, right? Every humans are like the humans that are in these bubbles are working towards being a better human for this planet, and then building this social this critical mass. Maybe it will happen in 200-300 years, who knows. But yeah, that's how I see social permaculture action right now.
One of the things that Eleanor, you touched on, so I have to blurt this out before I forget it. It's important to remember that one of the things that permaculture does a really good job of is creating working models of alternatives. So the status quo, whether it be in agriculture or whatever, is not necessarily working well. And to a large extent, I think permaculture is still a fringe movement because a lot of the systems that are destroying the planet are still working a little bit. The late Milton Friedman, who created the odious economic philosophy that whereby small government was better, reduced taxes, etc., etc. Every single country where his horrible, tragically despicable economic philosophy has been applied has resulted in the gutting of the middle class, broadening of the lower class, and the concentration of capital to the what I call the donor class. It's basically every single country where it has been applied. It's resulted in economic devastation for working class people. But it's important to remember that when he started, he was at the Chicago School of Economics, and when he was starting this, they weren't getting a lot of traction. There was not a lot of traction because the world had come out of a world war. Before that, there was a depression, and both of those were basically, I say solved, but it's not really what happened. But both of those, the conditions were dealt with by massive government spending, and the outcome was better than what was going on, et cetera, et cetera. So for us as permaculturalists, to touch on what you said, Eleanor, it's really, really important that we continue doing what we're doing and seeding these ideas out there. And that way, when there is a hiccup, because that was his philosophy, this is what he told his students, keep putting our ideas out there. And when there's a hiccup and they're frantically looking for solutions, our solutions will be laying around, waiting to be picked up and used. And that's largely what's happened. And so for the work that we're doing, and it's really important to keep doing what we're doing, even though the transformation, I don't know if the transformation is going to happen in my lifetime. I kind of doubt it. But the fact that we're making viable alternatives to the status quo that are both economically, financially viable, but also environmentally beneficial. And those aren't necessarily just pure agricultural models. That's also social models, ways of interacting with one another, cooperatives, purchasing cooperatives for food, or cooperatives for centralized purchasing and exportation of commodities, whatever. These models become increasingly attractive as the present economic model is consuming itself. So I just really want to say it's really important, the work that we're doing, that we keep doing it and we keep seeding our ideas out there so that when these hiccups come, because they're coming, I mean, they're happening right now everywhere, that there is a viable alternative, one that hopefully doesn't involve putting people up against the wall or building beautifully handcrafted, sustainable Forest Stewardship Council certified home guillotine kits to lop the heads off of the people that are doing all the damage, because that's also the other alternative. I mean, if faced with a situation or a present system that does nothing for most of the people, the alternative has to be either something good and positive, or something horrible is going to happen. Just throwing that out there. Forget all my jokes about the guillotine. But I mean, seriously, like putting out positive alternatives to the existing system is one of the most powerful things that we can do.
Yeah.
And thank you, Christopher. And Alfred, yeah, I just want to say one thing. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be one model that is adopted, because every region is different, right? And everyone interacts differently because of the culture, because of international hub. So there is so many models that can be adopted by so many communities, and the key is in the connection of all these little networks and all these not networks, all these little clusters and hubs, and how do you pass knowledge and how do you pass value, right? So it doesn't need to be a unified system. It's a decentralized. We talk a lot about decentralization, but it's really about decentralizing things. And what is that valuable thing that that community does that can serve that other community, right? And it just matches one need. And if everyone does that, then we are super wealthy, right? In like the human patrimoine, you know,
Patrimony.
patrimony. So yeah, so I pass the ball to you, Alfred.
No, I just want to add that I really agree with what Christopher said about Milton Friedman. And I think actually to understand a bit of the world we live in nowadays, really everyone needs to understand the philosophy of neoliberal capitalism that Friedman was the godfather of. And just to add that right after I did my first PDC, I was still involved in the anti-globalization movement. And one morning I got a phone call that Milton Friedman was going to give a talk in San Francisco on how to privatize public education. And so I actually snuck into the conference and threw a pie in his face there and felt that that was a form of activist permaculture of people care.
I have a question. Is there video of this?
Yes, I'll share the link of the video. Yeah.
Oh, wow! I look forward to watching this 1,000 times and maybe finding a Dave Matthews mashup video of it of the pie. Anyway, bravo.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, really.
Yeah, for me, it's I like Eleanor's thing about opting out, going into your bubble, and then, as you say, you can. Not everyone needs the same rules, but these provides us platforms we can communicate. We could be politically opposed to someone, but yet we can still trade with them. We can still build these networks up, and then just as an antidote to social media and the extremism, and you're put in one camp or the other camp, and it's just building frameworks to come together and build these alternative networks and opt out. I think that's how we solve it, because if we're in that system, we're funding that system, which is destroying the place, having wars, and if we can have a local economy where that's not extracted out and used for the wrong thing, well, I think that's my opinion.
So increasingly, Cormac, what I do is I look for commonalities. There's people that there's one or two issues that I don't agree with them on. As long as they're not fundamentally based in racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, or some kind of deal breaker for me, and I can see commonality. The older I get, the more I seek out these commonalities, because otherwise it's really easy to silo ourselves into groups of like-minded people. And there's thankfully relatively short-lived and mostly marginalized movement called libertarian permaculture, which wasn't so much as like hysterically funny as blasphemy. It was like, and it was basically back to the landers, lock and load, and me and mine, and most of them honestly weren't doing anything very impressive with their land use patterns either. Um, but it was very short-lived in terms of its prominence, and these people are still out there, and they're still flogging the dead horse that they need to be run out of town on. But basically finding the commonality, even with some of those people, there's things I'm going to agree with. And it's like, how, I guess the older I get, the more I understand that I need to seek out the commonalities instead of pivoting on the one or two issues that we disagree on. And as long as it's not rooted in something that I find absolutely hateful, frequently the commonality can be a powerful thing. And we're coming to a point where we're going to be seeing the commonality as climate change is hitting. I mean, we had here in Belize, we had 2 weeks with days above 100 degrees. Never happened before. You're watching repeated hurricanes. North Carolina, when I was young, I walked the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Virginia, and I went down into Irwin to resupply. Got off the Appalachian Trail a few places. A beautiful part of the world with wonderful people. And man, they've been hit with these hurricanes, but you're seeing people coming together. We're going to increasingly need to form alliances and allegiances with people that we may not fully agree with, or we may find one or two issues that we disagree with. And I think that finding common ground is going to be very, very important moving forward. So the younger me, with much more strident and ardent leftist than I am now, although my politics haven't changed. But again, I look for the commonality, and as long as there's not a deal breaker rooted in hatred, I can, generally speaking, work with people. And I think that's one of the things that we can aspire to in social permaculture is lateral movement of aid and information into communities that we would maybe normally not work with because of politics or whatever belief systems.
Agreed.
Guys, that's been great. If you just any final thoughts now, if you just want to walk around the circle again, final thoughts and where people can reach you. Alfred, you want to go first there?
Well, maybe just that I think social permaculture can be kind of scary. And just speaking personally, when I think about going into a garden, I never feel scared, or never feel kind of, oh, this is going to be hard. And oftentimes going into a meeting at a cooperative or a network, you go into thinking, oh, this is going to be hard. Oof, this is really not what I want to be doing. But maybe just to say that for me, it's that along with all the other work that we're already doing, so people don't need to give up their passions, but just that really social permaculture could be one of the keys for unlocking the potential of permaculture and really allowing us to scale up. And right now, in the work I'm doing with this network called Permaculture for Refugees, it's often really painful. And right now, I'm really focused on collaborating with people in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. And it's painful. It's really it's breaking my heart what's happening there. But at the same time, I feel that this is just if we can bring permaculture to the degree that we can make permaculture useful. For example, I'm collaborating with an agricultural cooperative in the West Bank, and they're facing the most horrific conditions trying to get to their fields or take care of their trees and harvest the olives right now. Meanwhile, the far right settlers are burning down their olive trees, and the Israeli military are blockading them from their fields. But to the degree to which we can make connections with people who are working in those conditions, I think it just enriches all of us, and it unlocks so many powerful ways that as people we can learn from each other. And so even though it's scary and painful, to me it's really giving me a lot of meaning in a time when otherwise I would just be heartbroken. So that's what I want to say about social
Thank
permaculture.
you. Eleanor?
This conversation has been, I loved everything that we talked about and I learned, and it's actually giving me also some tips to navigate through some kind of personal issue that I have with a friend right now. And oh, where did this American accent just sorry. And yeah, so it's fun how with the professional part, I am putting so much, like I'm framing it so clearly that there should be no, and there are not conflicts. But then on the friend side and on the personal side, some people really need like this framework, and it's like I am understanding right now that that's probably what that person needs, and it was not clear to me. So thank you to all of you. That is solving a problem.
Christopher?
I think we're at a point in world development where the work that we do is actually really critical and essential, and it's not just the agricultural practices, but it's the social practices. I think that what's key for us moving forward is identifying the leverage points where the least amount of energy will have the maximum yield, so that our rewards will be good. I think to do that, a good foundation should be established in terms of an MOU or expectations that so that people aren't disappointed by the work going forward. I think I'm really glad that we touched on that a lot, because I think it's really critical to be able to refer to something in any endeavor moving forward, and then again, finding that commonality with people that we might disagree with on one or two issues is important, and will be increasingly important because we have with the pending climate crisis, which is not pending; it's actually unfolding. As witnessed by the fires we had here and the hurricanes and flooding in different parts of the world and drought across the world. We're seeing more and more of that. So I guess that, again, leverage points where the yields will be oversized so that we maximum amount of return on the minimum amount of energy, because a lot of us don't have a lot of energy to be able to invest. Finding commonality, and then foundational work in understanding the responsibilities and through some form of codification. If you're going to work with a group of more than 4 people, if it's 4 people or less, you can probably sort it out. But once it gets above that, it gets more complicated. So it's been an absolute pleasure hearing Alfred and Eleanor's work, and it's always a pleasure talking with you, Cormac. I'm always tickled pink when I get invited to come back and talk with you guys. So with you, Cormac. So very much appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, so for me, it's I should forget what I was going to say. My mind's gone blank. I'll edit this out. Do you just want to go back around again, just where people can reach you, just quickly, Alfred?
Yeah, sure. You can look for Alfred Decker Permaculture on social media, or else 12P Permaculture Design, or do a web search and my website will pop up.
Eleanor?
So you can look at the website architectsoflife.earth. There's the contact email. You can also look at my LinkedIn, Eleanor Todini. Contact me directly. I think it's very easy nowadays.
Christopher?
But my name is Christopher Nesbitt. My email is christopher.nesbitt@mmrfbz.org. That's for the NGO that we run, and then we have a consulting firm which is believes permaculture and renewable energy, which we do land use assessments and rapid species indexes, and as well as solar work. And that is easy to remember for this group, which is christopher.nesbitt@permaculture.bz. So, and I can be reached via email. And yeah.
Thanks very much, everybody. So I'll edit this back. So my takeaways from this is, as someone who's only been introduced to this recently, or actually looked at it, I think it's well worth doing, and it's well worth a skill that permaculture practitioners should be adding to their repertoire. Definitely, I see the value in it, and as I said before, had I known what I know now, I potentially would have avoided conflict that I've experienced, and unfortunately, it resulted in the end of a friendship, which is never good. And I understand it's two people from two different perspectives, and if we had that memorandum of understanding, things may have gone better. So that's been the Permaculture Vine podcast about social permaculture, guys. Thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Cormac. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Cormac.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.